You need to understand what the point is. And here's, when I started...
But does that mean that the exploitation of, I don't know, you name the group, let's say in the building of the railroads, it got pretty rough, a lot of people died.
Was that good? No. Was slavery good? No. All of those things were bad. And I can go through a whole list of bad things.
So can we do better today?
And we can concentrate on those. We can learn from those, and we can move on and do things better. But to just take the bad and say that negates the good, I think is a spurious argument.
Margaret in Buffalo, New York. Margaret, you're on the air with Dr. Carson.
Hi, Tom.
Hi.
I've been listening for the past half hour, and I just want to make a comment about Dr. Carson saying that he's not speaking either from a liberal or conservative point of view, but sort of a common sense approach. I find that a bit hypocritical because everything he's saying sounds to me like it comes right from a conservative manual. And I find that sort of disingenuous to claim that this is not conservative philosophy. What am I missing?
Dr. Carson?
I'd like to know what I've said that doesn't make sense.
No, she didn't say that. She simply said it sounds like it comes from a conservative playbook.
Then basically what she's saying is that conservatives make sense. That's what she's saying. That's essentially what you just said.
Well, I didn't hear about sense, but she's going more to the point of your claim of being neither left nor right. And she said it doesn't sound like her.
I claim to be a common sense person. And the things that I'm talking about, I don't think they should be conservative or liberal. I think they should be things that benefit everybody. See, we're too interested in taking everything and categorizing it in one party or another party. And we're too interested in sniping at each other. And we're too interested in saying my point of view is the only right one, rather than sitting down and having intelligent, open discussions about the pros and cons of the way that we do things. Once we learn how to do that, then we're going to make real progress.
I think it's great when people speak up. I mean, that's what citizenship ought to be. Let me ask you, you're a physician. That means a man of science. You're also a religious man. I have read that you do not accept the theory of evolution. What do you think on that front?
Well, that's a very long conversation. But the fact of the matter is, I believe that God did in fact create us. I think he used very excellent scientific ways of doing it. I do believe in natural selection or microevolution, that things have the ability to adapt to their environment and to change. But I see that as a sign of an intelligent creator who didn't want to start over every 50 years. I have no evidence that one species can turn into another species. I'm open-minded, and when someone can show me where that has happened, I'd be very happy to accept it. I look at the complexity of our universe. We can predict 70 years hence when a comet is coming. It's such precision. To say that there was a Big Bang and all of that just happened, that requires a great deal more faith than I have.
Are you saying with that you believe God made all the species from the get-go?
I believe that God created each species specifically.
So they didn't evolve one from the other or from some original. So that really is...
There's no evidence that one species turns into another species.
And what about...
That's conjecture.
I've just got another minute with you. Again, you're a man of faith. It's quite public. How do you see the dictate of Jesus to care for the poor? How far does that responsibility go as a Christian? How do you see that playing out in public policy?
I think we are brother's keepers. I think we have great responsibility toward the poor. And I think one of the best things that we can do for the poor is to create mechanisms whereby they can empower themselves, not mechanisms that say, you poor little thing, you can't do anything for yourself, I'm going to take care of you, don't you worry about a thing. That's what I call a backhanded slap.
Are you going to stay in the public arena? You're retiring from surgery this summer.
I will continue to be in the public arena, absolutely. No question about it.
And what would it take to put you there in a explicitly political way?
That's going to take the guy who created the universe.
Dr. Ben Carson, Director of the Division of Pediatric Neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins, author of America the Beautiful and Gifted Hands, the Ben Carson Story. Thank you very much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
In a moment, we...
Our guest today is a veteran of British journalism, a longtime political columnist for the Daily Express and the Evening Standard. Peter Howard has abandoned Fleet Street to become a lecturer, author, and playwright, and a traveling evangelist in the most respected sense of that word. Mr. Howard is committed to moral rearmament, and since the death of Dr. Frank Bookman, he has taken over the prime responsibility for the carrying forward of the moral rearmament movement. Mr. Howard is an undisguised moralist, and proudly so. His latest book, Britain and the Beast, is an undisguised attack on the present morality of his native land. Mr. Howard, what about the morality of this land?
You must tell me about that. That's your job.
Well, how long have you been here?
I've been here on this occasion for 3 days, but it's my 15th visit to your country.
Mm-hmm. Well, you must have certainly drawn some conclusions comparatively from British morality to United States morality.
Well, I wouldn't like to compare British morality with the United States morality. I will say this, that we in Europe know that we owe our liberty and our chance to be free people to the generosity, the courage, and the vision of America. You've been more generous than any other people in the whole of human history. We also know very clearly that the future liberty of ourselves and the whole world depends on where America leads us today. And I think that very much depends on the character of the American people.
Have you made no judgments as to the character of the American people?
It's not my job to judge, but I think if America actually lives the ideal she talks about, she'll do fine.
Well, you have made some severe judgments on the character of the British people.
I've made some severe judgments on my own character and the character of my country because I love us enough to want to see us different.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, you see, in an age where the character of a nation is actually its greatest strength. We used to be rich, we used to be strong, we used to plant our feet in every corner of the globe, and as a matter of fact, we did do our best, although we made mistakes. Today, much of our wealth has gone, our power has gone, in a sense. What remains is the character of our people. And at that very time, I believe the traditional morality of Britain, the honor and purity of our homes, the unselfishness of our public life is under attack. And I think that's a very serious thing because our character remains our one strength.
Is this a new thing, this attack upon the character of the British people?
I think it's new. For the first time, people have come out openly in the pulpit, in the press, and incidentally on the television, and undermine faith, undermine traditional morality, undermine the standards which we used to accept as normal. I think that is new.
How is this undermining taking place? Specifically, what are some examples of this?
Well, you get bishops standing up in Britain and saying that premarital infidelity is normal, that God is possibly a myth, and that it might be a good thing if we didn't mention him in our country for 25 years. I think in my boyhood, if a bishop had said that, people would have thought he was crazy.
Is this one bishop, or do you think it's characteristic of the entire religious community?
No, it's certainly not characteristic of the entire religious community, but you have a whole section of the religious leaders of my country who try and keep up with the times by cutting Christ down to human size. I think in a Christian country that's a very serious thing. I think what sincere Christians and religious people are meant to do is to try and hold the human character up to Christ. And if you try and make Christ, in the sense that he's a model man for all people, conform to human comfort, to human compromise, you do attack the character of a nation.
Do you, and as moral rearmament, the people in moral rearmament, consider Britain a Christian country, the United States a Christian country, and do they consider it important that the world become a Christian world?
I don't know whether I would consider Britain a Christian country. We're a country that still calls itself Christian, but I think we live far, far, far from what a Christian country should live. I think it should be normal for countries that love freedom to fight to bring moral rearmament to the whole world, because I think freedom can only exist if a certain morality, a certain character exists in people. You see, William Penn, a good many years ago, gave a truth which I think was not a religious truth so much as an everlasting political truth. He said men must choose to be governed by God, or they condemn themselves to be ruled by tyrants. Well, today it's more serious, because I believe if the free nations that still have a faith in God do not live it in such a way that the world says that is the way all men are meant to live, we may condemn whole continents to be ruled by tyrants. That's a grave responsibility.
Well, does moral rearmament, the people in moral rearmament, consider that the God should be a Christian God?
I am a Christian, and personally I believe that the fullest truth that God has entrusted to man is in the personality of Jesus Christ and in the Christian faith. But in a world which is not universally of that opinion, I think that absolute moral standards are a basis on which all men can stand. Absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness and absolute love are a common factor in the conscience of all humanity. And I believe all men can listen to God and obey him. And I think that's where we ought to start.
But the question in my mind is the thrust of moral rearmament toward a specifically Christian world?
The thrust of moral rearmament is to have all men everywhere governed by men, governed by God. That is our immediate aim.
But the Christian God or a less specific God?
There's only one God.
Then is he a Christian God? That is my question.
Well, to me, he's a Christian God.
But the movement itself will accept other beliefs, is that correct?
Oh, we deal with everybody, you see. I've just been in India, which is largely a Hindu or Muslim country. And moral rearmament in India, in its first stage, consists in answering the plea of the finance minister that at a time when the country is under invasion from the north, 63% of last year's income tax was not paid. The plea of the industrialists who say we cannot do any business without corruption. The plea of the men who run the nationalized railways who say that last year on the national railways of India, $6 million they know was cheated from people who didn't pay their fares. That is the start of the moral rearmament of India. It's, it's Christian certainly, but it doesn't happen to be something that you need go into theological questions to answer. You just say to the fellow, are you going to be honest or not?
Let me read back to you some of the things you said, and they relate to what you've just been saying from your book, Britain and the Beast. You speak of the ancient virtues, and this thread goes throughout your entire book. And you say, yet there was a grandeur, a glory, a spirit of comradeship and sacrifice in the days of the British Empire, in the life and death of those men, known and unknown, civil servants, soldiers, and humble men, and great with their womenfolk who loved their country and believed in her. And then you quote a poem which says, they went with songs of the battle, they were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady in the glow. And then you compare these young men with the people whom you say squat in the street or twist in dives, doubtless have within them the same courage, but it's cheap to teach them to sneer at their fathers whose blood paid for their liberty. This is, in a way, speaking of the good old days, and I wonder if, as they say, nothing is so good as the good old days, not even the good old days. Is this really an accurate picture of a comparative look at the present and the past?
No, but you've read a couple of paragraphs out of quite a long book. There's a lot more to the book than that. Of course I don't want to go back to the days where the British Empire ruled the earth and you hoisted the Union Jack and everybody stood to attention. It's not either my desire or actually I'm not such a fool as to think it could happen. What I do know is that in my lifetime when I was a boy, there were people brought up with the idea that they should actually try and serve other nations. Now, a lot of us were stuffed shirts, a lot of us were conceited, many of us may have been selfish, but there was a certain tradition of service bred into the heart of British people which was true and of God. Today the empire is gone. What has taken its place? We do not yet have a role in the modern world, and as a result our youth, and actually they're fine youth, don't know really what to do. And without a faith and a sense of destiny for their country and a sense of service for the world, the strength, the passion, the ability that used to go into the British Empire now goes into squatting in the streets or debunking chastity, faith, and the old virtues. I think that's bad. I think we've got to give them something great to live for.
Mr. Howard, do you believe that there is more sin today than there was in the days of the Empire?
Well, I'm not God Almighty, so I can't answer that question. I should say that there are more people openly advocating sin and more people openly indulging in it, yes.
Mm-hmm. Getting back to this country, do you think that something like the Profumo scandal could occur in this country? And if it did, would it shake this country as it apparently did Great Britain?
Well, the trouble about America is this, that if you love America as she is, which I deeply do, but fight to help her become the country she could be, some people say you're anti-American. Of course, I'm not such a fool as not to know that there are plenty of Profumo scandals behind the curtains in America. You know that as well as I do, and not just in politics. I imagine that if the thing was discovered in America, there'd equally be a fuss. But I'm not at all out to muckrake or point fingers or have a sort of spiritual Gestapo. I'm dead against it. What I want to see is men so love freedom that they will pay the price of extending it in our country and around the earth.
If morality is so decadent in Britain, that is, if it is so openly, immorality so openly advocated, and if character is under such an assault, why was it that Britain was so greatly ashamed and shaken by the Profumo scandal? Doesn't this indicate a strong and keen moral sense?
It sure does, and I think that the strong and keen moral sense has been greatly stimulated by such pricks and salts and shouts as myself and my friends have been able to give. But you see, we went through a Dunkirk in a military sense. Up till World War II, a lot of people thought we were cowardly. A lot of people thought we wouldn't fight. A lot of people, including some Americans, thought we'd be licked to hell if we did fight. Well, then war came. And still, it was the phony war. It was songs in the streets, but pretty good selfishness in the homes. And then Dunkirk happened. And I lived through those days, and my brother died in them. And something came alive in the heart of Britain that had always been there, but which it took a crisis to awaken. I believe today we're in such a moral crisis in Britain. I believe my country will rise to it, and I believe, as a matter of fact, our service, and I'm talking about service to the world, lies ahead in its fullest sense. But I don't want to let Britain off the sting of the crisis that may help her to become truly great.
A moment ago you said that when you talk about what America can become, you are thought to be anti-American. What do you mean in specific terms?
Well, I mean that the Americans are rather like the British. They're very proud people. And unless you say America is terrific, America is the cat's whiskers, hallelujah for America, people say you're anti-American. I feel very simply this. I feel America is the strongest and most powerful country in the modern world, and I thank God for it. But I also feel that unless America knows where she wants to take the world, tells the world where she wants to take the world, and pays the price in her public and private life so that the world say that is the way all men are meant to live, America actually may miss the challenge of history.
Do you think perhaps that the assassination of President Kennedy might have been a slight prick, a slight moral awakening, as you call it, for this country?
I mean, to talk about the assassination of President Kennedy the whole world was shocked and appalled at what took place. And most people in America were more shocked and appalled than people in the rest of the world, I imagine. But I think we do have lessons to learn from the assassination of President Kennedy, from the assassination of President Diem, and from the assassination of character going on all over the world. You introduced me by saying I wanted to be a square or something. Well, I'm not afraid of that term. I want to stand four square in public and private for what I believe to be right. And I believe that some nation has got to stand four square in the modern world and say right is right, wrong is wrong, and we stand for the right in our international policies, in our private lives, in our public policies, for the right as God gives us to see the right.
Is there always a right and a wrong as simply as that in an international dealing?
I know there always is in a personal dealing, and I strongly suspect there is in an international dealing. But you see, if you go to international conferences, as I'm sure you do, and as I often have done, the problems sitting around the table are always far more pressing than the problems sitting on the table. And people spend hours, weeks, and months discussing problems on the table, but the problems around the table remain completely unchanged. Human nature doesn't shift because nobody tackles it.
So if the negotiators themselves were changed, you feel that the problems would be solved?
I think if men earnestly sought for what was right, instead of desperately trying to prove who is right and I'm right, we should get forward much faster.
Can we agree around that table what is right to begin with? Isn't that the basic disagreement?
Two of us sitting around this table, and I strongly suspect that we'd agree on most points as to what was right and what was wrong. Whether we decide to do the right is another thing.
We can agree upon the ends, but not the means, perhaps.
Well, let's start by agreeing the ends and then discussing the means.
Do you think that there is an agreement as to ends vis-a-vis the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union?
Well, I tell you what I think. There's a lot of talk nowadays about populating the planets and space race and soon to the moon and all that. Supposing you and I, sitting here, had to decide we had a planet that was going to open up next week, and President Johnson came to us and said, I've just had a telephone call from Mr. Khrushchev, and you two men are to decide who are the 20 men to send to populate that planet, and you have to decide in the next half hour. Now, which part of the world should we take those 20 men from? Out of the West, in my lifetime, have come 2 world wars, fascism, Hitlerism, and the social and economic injustice tolerated, which was the fuel of Karl Marx and world communism. I don't think that we could be quite sure we'd send people to build the right kind of world on that planet. Out of the communist world, after 46 years of socialist experiment, Khrushchev says publicly, unless we find a new type of man, we may fail. And you have a colossal division right here and now between the big communist nations. I don't rejoice at it. I think it's temporarily good from the point of view of the free world. But I hope that some group of men was actually going to find to live unity. I believe the only way you can really populate a new planet is if you find men who are willing to let God actually decide in public and in private how they're to live, to listen to him and obey him. I think if you get to that situation, you'll find the end to the divisions of color and class and race and accent and background that so bedevil humanity.
And here's the problem. In the Khrushchev says, and I assume that you agree with that moral statement, unless we find a new man, we may fail. The difference, perhaps, is the way he goes about making a new man or creating a new man, and the way you, or the British Empire, or the United States democracy, would hope that a new man would emerge spontaneously.
I know that human nature can be changed, you see. I've experienced it. I know that men can change. I believe that human nature has got to be changed. I believe that is the root of any permanent world answer. National economies, of course, must be changed, and world history must be changed. But unless we deal with human nature on a colossal scale, the world will continue to divide and I think possibly destroy itself.
And how can that be done? Changing human nature on a colossal scale.
Well, some people used to think it could be done by changing the environment of man alone. Now, I am dead keen for environment to be changed. I think that the division between fat and thin in the modern world is far more serious, as a matter of fact, than the division between East and West. I think that we've reached a stage in human history where every hungry stomach in the world can be filled, where every empty hand can be given work, and where people can have the right homes to live in and the right background to give them a fair and honest chance in life. But having said all that, I do not see how we are going to build a world that really works unless we deal with human nature. And environment alone will not do it. I believe in the democracies which still say they have a faith in God, or most of them. We ought to demonstrate to the entire world who men are, who believe in God can live like sons of God. Then we'd have something the whole world would want. At the moment, a lot of people in Africa and Asia look at us and say they tell us they want us to be like them, but we don't want to be like them. That's our weakness.
Your insistence upon God and godlike men puts you directly opposite the Soviet official position, doesn't it?
Well, I've been looking at the American dollar, and I see there it says, "In God we trust," which I suppose it means that America trusts God more than a dollar or a gun. Is that what it means?
I can't answer that.
Oh, well, I beg your pardon. I thought you might. But I tell you, I think Khrushchev, probably, I've never spoken to Khrushchev, I think probably Khrushchev disbelieves in God because he looks at the nations who speak in God's name. And he says, if there's really a God, they'd be different. I think on that point he's right. I don't start on the basis that everybody has to believe in God. For years, I was an unbeliever, an atheist. I was challenged to make an honest experiment in absolute standards. I was brought up in Oxford at philosophy, and I at once said, oh, you can't have an absolute standard of morality. It's relative, you see. And a coal miner and a highly trained Marxist at once said to me, if you have a standard at all, it must be absolute, otherwise it's no standard. Well, I hated that because it was so clear that even an Englishman could understand it, and I knew it was true. And then they tried, you see, they challenged me, these people. They said, if you don't believe in God, you wouldn't mind listening to him, would you? You wouldn't expect to get any results. Well, again, for some reason that annoyed me because it was so obviously true, and I made an honest experiment. I saw very clear places in my own life where I needed to change. Simple things like honesty with taxes, jealousy in the family, superiority as an Englishman. But I also saw certain things in my life which I knew should change, but which I had no power to change. Then, to me, it was a test. Is there a power, call it what you like, God, that can do in me and for me things I cannot do for myself? And I made the experiment. I found those things could happen. That was how my faith began.
Mr. Howard, is there a hierarchy of sin? Is one sin worse than another? For example, is adultery worse than character assassination?
I can't answer that question. You must apply to God for the answer. I've got no list of sin in my book.
Well, and where do you begin in this great change of human nature?
Well, we were talking yesterday to a group of highly intelligent men, I suppose some of the most intelligent men in America. And one of them said to me with considerable force, is it intellectual change you're talking about? And I replied to him, well, if you worship your intellect before God, that's probably where you need to start changing. If you worship your body before God, that's probably where you start to need changing. If you worship dollars or profits or color or class or race or your pet hates before you worship God, that's probably where you need to start changing. Everybody knows in his heart. There's no single pattern. Everybody knows where he needs to start.
Now, you're talking about worship, and you're talking about a relationship between a man and the concept of God. Does the problem of the world stem from that relationship, however wrong you may conceive it to be, or does it stem from the broken and the non-communicative and the destructive relationships between men on a horizontal level?
Well, I think both, as a matter of fact. You see, worship may be the wrong word. Everybody's guided by something. Some people are guided by money. Some people are guided by power. Some people are guided by what their wife or the neighbors think. What I want to see is people guided by the inner voice. Call it the inner voice if you like. That's something everybody has, which tells them what's wrong and what's right, and also tells them what their relationship should be with their fellow men. You see, I'm interested. I happen to believe that differences, hatreds of color and class, are not right. I think they're too small and too dangerous. But you get an awful lot of people, for example, who get in a fearful rage about color distinction in South Africa, for example. But if you mention a rich person to them, they get furious about the rich. Well, I don't think it's more noble to hate a man because he's white, or to hate a man because he's black, than to hate a man because he's rich, or to hate a man because he's poor. I think hate is hate.
Is the inner voice absolute, or can it be trained or mistrained?
If you want to mistrain or train it, you can, but actually it depends on you. If you want to listen to the inner voice is very accurate, very down to earth, and talks your language.
I'm thinking of the inner voice perhaps of Huckleberry Finn, who felt guilty because he did not turn in Jim the Negro on the raft to the people who were looking for the runaway slave. Or the Nazi who did not turn in the Jew, who within his own context obeyed an inner voice that was trained.
Well, now, I won't have you attack Huck Finn to me, because though I'm an Englishman, he's a hero of
No
mine.
attack, believe me.
But you see, over the Nazi thing, it's a very good question. And I happen to have in my possession the Gestapo handbook on moral rearmament, which was delivered to the Nazi military authorities. And it instructed them to smash our work wherever we went, and it told them why. And the reason they gave was this: they are restoring a sense of right and